escape. What have we been told? Easy to unfold. Future might seem out of reach, but we're getting close. Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me? We won't leave it to chance. We can write our romance. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me when the sky starts to change? Yeah, we won't be afraid. We'll never be the same again. Will you follow me? We won't leave it to chance. We can write our romance. We'll never be the same
You're streaming with the Fantasy Follow. Welcome to TFF Live and Week 11 of Fantasy Football. We've got a great day of football ahead, 12 games today, plus the Monday night game tomorrow night as we get closer and closer to your fantasy football playoffs. We have got a great show for you today. Let's give you a look at what's on tap. We got to look back at last week's action. We'll give you some player updates from around the league. We got our starts and sits for Week 11, and also we'll have our actives and inactives. They're out for the 1 o'clock matchups. And don't forget, live chat is open right now. Please drop your questions in there. No matter what we're doing, we are here for your live chat. So even if we're doing something else, let us know. Ask us your fantasy football questions. We are answering those all show long. In addition, if you're watching on replay, please feel free to leave us a comment below. But let's get right into it. Probably the most interesting story that we're watching this week is the quarterback situation in New Orleans with Drew Brees injured and on IR. It is expected to be Taysom Hill getting the start at quarterback today against the Atlanta Falcons. Now, during the week at first, Jameis Winston was the guy that many thought would be getting this start, but the Saints have decided to go with Taysom Hill if all goes as expected. Certainly going to be an interesting watch in this game, a player that we've seen in and out of the lineup plenty in a lot of gadget-type plays, but really haven't seen him try to perform as a straight quarterback for the Saints. What does this mean for fantasy purposes? Well, you have to believe that the Saints are going to continue to lean on Alvin Kamara. He's been great this year. The real question is, what are we going to see out of Michael Thomas at the wide receiver spot? And certainly, I don't know that you're necessarily playing Taysom Hill as a quarterback this week unless you're completely desperate. But I do think that it's worth the watch, because if he does perform well and adds you those rushing yards, perhaps some goal line touches and touchdowns, that certainly gives you a nice floor going forward. And certainly you would have Taysom Hill for a few weeks. So a lot of reasons to watch this game. It'll be very interesting to see what happens in New Orleans. Take a look back at Week 10 for the top fantasy scorers from last week's action, starting out as we always do at the quarterback spot. And see, I knew it. I knew Tom Brady was going to have that bounce-back game in a win against Carolina. 31.84 fantasy points. That was 341 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, and the veteran is really turning into a dual-threat quarterback. 2 rushing yards, but he did have a touchdown on the ground as well. Kyler Murray in that win against Buffalo, the Hail Murray against my Buffalo Bills, 30.90 fantasy points. That was 245 yards, 1 passing touchdown, 61 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns on the ground. Big Ben Roethlisberger in a win against Cincinnati, 29.32 fantasy points. That was 333 yards passing and 4 touchdowns. And then Josh Allen in that loss against the Cardinals, 28.86 fantasy points. That was 284 yards passing, 2 touchdowns through the air, adding 38 rush yards, no touchdowns on the ground. And then in 5th, it was Aaron Rodgers in a win against Jacksonville, 26.40 fantasy points, 325 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, also adding 4 rushing yards and a touchdown on the ground as well. Top scorers at the wide receiver spot, it was Cole Beasley for the Bills against the Cardinals, 27.90 fantasy points. That was 109 yards receiving, 11 catches, 1 touchdown. And then in the same game, DeAndre Hopkins, 25.70 fantasy points. That was 127 yards, 7 catches, and 1 touchdown. And then in the same game, Stephon Diggs, they were all in this game, 25.30 fantasy points. That was 93 yards receiving, 10 catches, 1 touchdown. Marquez Valdez-Scantling did not play in that game, but he did have 24.90 fantasy points against Jacksonville, 149 yards receiving, 4 catches, 1 touchdown. And then a tie in 5th, it was Deontay Johnson and Marvin Jones Jr., both with 23.60 fantasy points. Deontay Johnson against Cincinnati, 116 yards, 6 catches, 1 touchdown. And Marvin Jones versus Washington, 96 yards, 8 catches, and 1 touchdown. Top scorers at the running back position, and all these guys do is win, 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 no matter what. All 5 of these guys in winning efforts, and leading the way, it was Alvin Kamara having a great year against the 49ers, 34.80 fantasy point, leading the way for all players in Week 10. That was 15 yards rushing with 2 touchdowns, and also 83 yards receiving, 7 catches, and 1 touchdown through the air. Josh Jacobs for Las Vegas against Denver, 29.60 fantasy points. That was 112 yards rushing with 2 touchdowns, 24 yards receiving, 4 catches, no touchdowns through the air. In 3rd, Nyheim Hines against Tennessee, 28.50 fantasy points. That was 70 yards rushing with a touchdown on the ground, 45 yards receiving, 5 catches, and 1 touchdown through the air. DeAndre Swift for the Lions against Washington, 25.90 fantasy points, 81 yards rushing, no touchdowns, 68 yards receiving, 5 catches, and 1 touchdown there. And then Ronald Jones against Carolina, 24.80 fantasy points, a huge 192 yards rushing, 1 touchdown, also added 6 receiving yards, 1 catch, no touchdowns there. And the top scores at the tight end spot, oh my goodness, hide your eyes. This is not good, but look at these scores. Anyways, a tie for first. Rob Gronkowski in a win against the Panthers, 13.10 fantasy points, tied with Mark Andrews in a loss against the Patriots. Same score. Gronkowski, it was 51 yards, 2 catches, 1 touchdown, and Andrews, it was 61 yards, 7 catches, no touchdowns. In 3rd, it was Hunter Henry against the Dolphins, 13.00 fantasy points. That was 30 yards receiving, 4 catches, and 1 touchdown. And then Cameron Brate, well, maybe if you combine the scores for those 2 guys from Tampa Bay, it's a decent day. Anyway, Brate against the Panthers, 12.10 fantasy points, 31 yards, 3 catches, 1 touchdown. And then it was Jordan Reed for the 49ers against the Saints, 11.20 fantasy points. That was 62 yards receiving, 5 catches, no touchdowns. All right, we're back with you here, and we got an early chat question to get to first. So let me get this reminder back up on the screen. We are answering your fantasy football questions all show long. We've got plenty of content for you, but even if we're in the middle of something else, drop us a chat. We are here for your questions. That's what we love to do. So our first question, welcome back, Braden Toll. And Braden, you ask, Calvin Ridley, Justin Jefferson, or Marvin Jones Jr. in my flex? All right, let's take a look here, Braden. We've got brand new graphics for everybody this week. And taking a look at the matchups, fantasy points allowed to the wide receivers on the left side of your screen. So let's do a quick run through Atlanta playing at New Orleans. That's Calvin Ridley. New Orleans, where are they? 14th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Justin Jefferson playing against Dallas. Dallas is the third most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot right now. And Marvin Jones Jr. for Detroit playing Carolina. Carolina currently at 21st. I actually think this is reasonably close amongst all three of these players. I think that Justin Jefferson is a great matchup. I like Adam Thielen best in that matchup, perhaps over Jefferson, because I think that Dalvin Cook is going to have a nice running game. I think that's going to take away volume from one of those two players. I feel like it's more likely that it gets taken away from Jefferson than it does from Thielen. Marvin Jones on the Detroit side. Detroit is without Kenny Golladay and also without Danny Amendola. We'll talk about that a little bit more in our actives and inactives. So that leaves Marvin Jones in a great spot there to kind of be a target leader amongst that team. But to me, Calvin Ridley is too good to leave sitting on your bench for either of these two players. The matchup is 14, just above halfway point. I think if I were going to choose one of these three, and again, I usually like to say, I try to give you my opinion, back it up with some information, but by all means, your roster best. So, go with your gut. To me, I think Calvin Ridley coming off a bye, yes, he was hurt, but he's had some time to recover. I think that is going to be a big-time passing game because as you compare it to the running game, New Orleans is allowing the fewest fantasy points to running backs as you take a look at that there. So that tells me that Atlanta is going to be throwing the ball a lot this game. I think Julio is going to have a nice game. I think Calvin will probably also be in line for a nice game. He's had a great year. Again, those other two guys, hey, I couldn't fault you if you feel like one of those other two has a chance to pop off a bigger game. But I feel like, to me, Calvin Ridley, that's the guy that you have drafted highest. That's the guy you're going to lean to as we get closer and closer to those fantasy football playoffs. You're leaning on your main guys most likely. I would say, of course, let me know how it works out, and I'll be watching, Braden. But I would say if I was going to pick one, I think Calvin Ridley is a decent choice there. But again, I certainly could see an argument for those other two. But again, thank you, Braden, for being with us, a return viewer. We appreciate all our return viewers. If any of you are new to the stream, we want to remind you, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Make sure you get those notifications whenever we have new content for you, and we will move right along with this show. And Braden, you say, I agree, thanks. And I say, no, thank you, Braden. We appreciate you being with us. And we are so happy to have all of you viewers on board with us. So thank you for being back. And definitely glad you jumped in the chat. Anybody else? We have questions, answering questions throughout the show. Even if we're working on other stuff, we will get to your questions as quickly as possible. All right, let's take you around the league for some player updates from the week leading up to today's games, and we will start off in Carolina.
It's sounding more and more that this is going to be a situation where it's a game time decision for you. How relieved are you that it's not anything more serious than that? And the second part of that question is, how much are you pushing back on whatever advice you're getting from the doctors as far as taking it easy in practice this week, so you can be able to play on Sunday?
Yeah. Honestly, I'm very, happy that it wasn't, as serious. Thankful. And then, I'm just taking it one day at a time, making sure that I'm, exhausting my resources, and listening to the advice that I'm receiving, because I know that, the advice that I'm getting from, those around me, they have my best interest. So that's my mindset right now. Just taking it one day at a time, trusting the advice that I'm receiving.
Just one other thing on Stafford, because he played with the injury Sunday and he looked fine with it, is, I don't know, what's different a couple of days later? You know what I mean? Like, is there, I don't know, if he could do it Sunday, why can't he do it?
Yeah. Well, I think you just always are amazed at what guys can do in the moment. I think you always just, stand there and marvel at that. And certainly with Matthew Stafford, you do that because sometimes things happen in the game and you're like, this guy's still going, it's unbelievable. But then, when things calm down, like we say, adrenaline is a beautiful thing. But when that stuff calms down, you want to be smart. You want to look at it and just, do the right thing.
Vic, just kind of, walk through what you want to see from Drew to make a decision in terms of physically and what do you want to see from him in practice, essentially, before you make the call?
Yeah, throwing and operating without showing any effects of the injury. And then also, when he comes in the following day, how he feels. To me, that's the big thing there. Is he throwing it accurately? Is he throwing it on time? Is his motion altered at all? Anything like that.
Doug, Alshon obviously got to be in a game last week and get used to the speed. I was just curious if you noticed anything different in him from practice this week, or maybe, a little bit more comfort now that he's kind of gotten his speed, in the game.
This week, I think each day he goes back out on the practice field, he gains confidence, through his injury and playing and limited role last week, would hope to expand that a little bit more this week and get him some more opportunities in this football game. But I think each week that he continues to practice, he just gets stronger, game speed, all of that. Veteran player, so he knows and understands that. He's looked good in practice. He looks quick. He looks fast. He catches everything his way, and just a big part of our offense and helping us potentially win.
Mike, is there a dilemma that you face in what comes with wanting to ride Dalvin? I know that he had 30 carries in Chicago and kind of that being, at least these last 3 games, what his workload's been, but also being cognizant with his workload. How do you, balance all of that out and knowing how much you can put on him to keep him sustainable for the rest of the season?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of that depends on Dalvin as we continue to move forward. We take pretty good care of him during the week. Each situation's a little bit different. Last week was a little bit more of a physicality game, with the front that they had. And we'll continue to look at all those things and look to, get Alexander in there a little bit more. When a game gets on the line and situations like that, then, he doesn't want to not be out there either with his guys. And so, I think that's a lot. When I say a lot of it depends on him, it does.
Actives and inactives are up next for the 1 p.m. games. But before we do that, we want to remind you the TFF Live Sunday Pregame Show. If you're new to the stream, we welcome you here. If you're a returning viewer, we welcome you back. Either way, we're here every Sunday at 12 noon with the TFF Live Sunday Pregame Show, taking you right up till game time, answering all your fantasy football questions, and getting you ready for your matchups each week. Actives and inactives are up next. All right, let's go ahead and get you your actives and actives for the 1 p.m. games. We got our lists are out. We keep a reminder up there throughout the duration of this to let you know that our live chat remains open, even if we're in the middle of something else. If you've got fantasy football questions, jump in the live chat. Let us know. That's what we're here for. We will get to those right away, and we will pick up where we left off with our content when we're done with your questions. We are here to help you guys out, and we love talking the fantasy football stuff. So by all means, jump in the live chat. That will remain open. In the meantime, we will start going through our actives and inactives for the 1 p.m. games, starting out with Philadelphia at Cleveland. this not much to see here on the either side, either active or inactive. What is of note in this game is that keep an eye, if you are planning on playing anybody in this game today, keep an eye on your weather output. It's been predicted for bad weather there, rain. I know I saw an early report today that it was 100% rain expected during this game. I did just check on Yahoo, and they don't have the percentage quite that high. But nonetheless, it does not look like it's going to be a nice day in Cleveland for the football action. So if you are playing anybody in this game, keep an eye on your weather, and potentially you may need to make a decision elsewhere. Very important to take a look at. And let me take a look at a quick chat as we go through here. And Larry is with us, and Larry is ever the chameleon. He goes with "Hola, Joe. Hola, Larry. ¿Cómo estás? Muy bien, y tú?" That's about all I can get for you there. Have a good day. I don't know, but hola back to you, Larry, and glad to have you back with the stream. Again, we are so happy to see all you regulars that come back with us all these weeks. We appreciate you being with us, and we love talking fantasy football with you. So glad to have you back, and we will continue on with our actives and inactives. The next game up is Atlanta at New Orleans. Not a lot to see here. Obviously, Drew Brees is on IR, so he's not on this list, but Drew Brees is not playing in this game. Calvin Ridley is active for the Falcons. It'll be Taysom Hill, as we said earlier, starting at quarterback. And whatever that brings with it, who knows? This is going to be a very interesting game. I'm kind of happy that my Buffalo Bills are on bye this week, so I can just be on the Sunday ticket and watching all the fantasy football action. I feel like this is a game that I will be checking in on regularly, not only because I have Ridley and Julio Jones in a couple of spots, but I also have Michael Thomas, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. I'm so concerned. I've considered possibly, I don't know how you can sit Michael Thomas, but I'm literally looking at one of my leagues right now on my other screen here where I have Michael Thomas slated in, and I have Justin Jefferson sitting on my bench. Jefferson playing against Dallas in a great matchup. The Thomas matchup is also great, but I don't know how you know what to expect with Taysom Hill back there. I feel like I have to leave him in there because he's his number one draft pick at the start of the season. I don't know how I can take him out, but it's just so difficult to understand what's going to happen there right now. Have heard some reports, and I mentioned this on our Saturday Star show that we did last night, but I hadn't heard anything about this yet. But I did hear today, interestingly, with Taysom Hill, that it was not 100% there, and it does sound like partially the reason they might be going with him is to kind of take a look and see where they're at moving forward. And I was wondering if that might be the case, especially with Drew Brees, his couple of injuries the past couple of years. Hard to say exactly what's going to happen there. I think they kind of want to get a feel for where they're at, and they've paid Taysom Hill pretty good-sized contracts. So I feel like they know what they got in Jameis Winston, and this perhaps is a little bit of a trial game. So I'm hoping to at least get maybe a touchdown out of Michael Thomas, get to that floor level, and then anything else is kind of gravy at that point. It's tough getting close to the playoffs like this to try to make a guess like that. But that's the situation that we're in. That's fantasy football. So anyways, back to actives, inactives. The next game, we're taking a look at Cincinnati at Washington. Dontrell Inman inactive for the Washington FTs. And we got Joe Mixon is again out, and he is now on IR, I believe. I'm not misspeaking there. So it'll be Giovanni Bernard getting all the work in the backfield again there for Cincinnati. I like this as a good game for the run game for the Washington football team. I like Gibson and I like McKissick today in this game. We'll see what happens on the other side of things. I think it's a little bit of a tougher matchup on the passing side for Cincinnati. So an interesting one to watch here. All right, we will jump on over. Let me clear this graphic out, and we'll be on game 4 when we come back. So if I forget, somebody remind me in the chat. And here's Larry. Any good reason to start Cam Newton over Big Ben? I can see. I don't necessarily think that Cam Newton is going to play poorly today. However, the matchup for Roethlisberger is fantastic, and we talked about this again a little bit last night on the Saturday Stars show. I feel that last week, in another matchup where they ran with I shouldn't say ran with the lead, but they were in the lead much of that game. They kept their foot on the pedal. They did not go away from the passing game, and it's very interesting to me. I don't really know why James Conner hasn't been seeing work in that sort of game script. But again, I think that's going to be the situation today. I think they'll perhaps be up big on Jacksonville. I expect them to keep the foot on the pedal and keep going to the pass game. Let's put a little comparison up here for you, Larry. A brand new graphic we got here. Hope you guys enjoy it. We got the fantasy points to the quarterback position, and we'll take a look at these two matchups. So Cam Newton playing in the 1 o'clock window at Houston. Houston allowing, where are they on the list? 17th, so just at the halfway point in terms of fantasy points allowed to the quarterback. However, if you take a look at it from more of a running back standpoint, you always expect Cam Newton to produce points on the ground. Houston's second most fantasy points to running backs, so they are definitely not good against the run. That would lead you to believe that there is some room for Cam Newton to have a nice game. The flip side, Roethlisberger, also in the 1 o'clock window at Jacksonville. Jacksonville allowing the third most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. I think that Big Ben is the choice here of these two players. Not necessarily do I think that Cam Newton is going to play poorly today, but I think it's a great spot for Roethlisberger. And again, I don't expect them to start handing the ball to James Conner if they end up with a lead in this game, simply because we haven't seen him do that. They didn't do it last week. So I think that Big Ben is a great play. As a matter of fact, when I do my starts and sits coming up, I'll give you a sneak preview, but Roethlisberger is my number one start this week. And I also think there is going to be plenty to go around for Juju, Deontay Johnson, and Chase Claypool in terms of the passing yards. I think it's a good game all around for those guys. So that would be my answer for you, Larry. By all means, I hope whichever one you choose, as always, crushes it. But I think Big Ben is a very reasonable choice there. All right, let's put the notification back up. Let everybody know as they're on the stream. Live chat is open. We are here all the way up till game time today. So if you're on the stream, feel free to jump in the chat. Any questions that you have, feel free to jump in there. We will continue getting you the information you need with the actives and inactives for the 1 o'clock games, going over to Detroit at Carolina coming up next. A lot of names on the list here on both sides of this one. For Detroit, no DeAndre Swift, concussion protocol. That means you're looking at Adrian Peterson and also Kerryon Johnson in the backfield there for Detroit today. Also, no Kenny Galladay, no Danny Amendola for the wide receivers. So, again, I expect this to be a nice volume day for Marvin Jones. Interesting to see what happens there, and I think there will be opportunities there in the passing game and in the run game. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey out for the Panthers. It'll be a Mike Davis game. And then on the other side, Teddy Bridgewater, who was questionable. He is active for this game. I'm going to double check over here on my list just to make sure that I'm not misspeaking, because that's an important one. And I actually am misspeaking. Teddy Bridgewater is inactive. So I will say Matthew Stafford is active in this game. And then I will get this graphic off the screen because it is wrong. I did miss that. Teddy Bridgewater is inactive. Not sure who. They didn't give much indication during the week of what they would do if Bridgewater couldn't play this week. So, yeah, he is out. Again, that even tells you even more that Mike Davis is a great player to look for in this game, because you have to figure they're going to lean on the run, and also they're going to have a lot of dump-off passes to Davis coming out of the backfield, and he certainly produces in that area as well. So another sneak preview, Mike Davis will be my number one start at the running back spot today once we get into starts and sits. So look for that in that game in the 1 o'clock window. All right, next game up is Pittsburgh at Jacksonville. Not a lot to see here. There's kind of a similar rundown as what we've had. Gardner Minshew is out. It'll be Jake Luton, or as I heard somebody pronounce his name during the week, Jake Luton. I have no idea if that's right. I can't imagine that it is. It seems like Luton would be the right pronunciation, but I'm sure there is a correct way to say his name, and it could be one of those two possibly. Laviska Shenault is out for Jacksonville. Hard to say what happens there. I mean, you'd think DJ Chark and Keelan Cole see a little bump, but again, playing against Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is actually not as good against the pass as you would think, even though they are a strong defense. They do allow fantasy points to wide receivers. So I don't necessarily dislike Chark or Cole if you need someone in that spot in this game. And again, if Pittsburgh throws it anything like they did last week, then Jacksonville is going to have to throw it in return. So you would think you could see a lot of air yards between these two teams in that game. All right, up next we've got Tennessee at Baltimore, a couple of 6-3 teams here. An interesting matchup. Again, I'm going to take a quick look and see if I can look at weather here because I'm not sure that Baltimore might have some issues there. I don't know if I have anybody that I can easily find that on my list here. So let me just go to the players list and see if I can be a little bit helpful. Check out Baltimore and see what we got going on there. Certainly if the weather's bad in Cleveland, it's possible that it's also not going to be all that great at the Ravens game. So let me see if I can get this up on the screen here. I don't see anything mentioned for weather there. It just says cloudy, 0% chance of precip. So no issues there. Adam Humphries is inactive for Tennessee. Nobody really else mentioned on either side to be spoken of here. I'm going to double check just to make sure I'm not misspeaking. Nope, Jalen Samuels out at the running back spot for Pittsburgh, but yeah, I don't think you're playing him anyway. And Tennessee, nothing else there. So that's about all we see in those games. An interesting game here. I think Baltimore wins that one. To me, I think Tennessee has kind of hit the slides a little bit as they got off to a great start. We'll be watching Derrick Henry to see what happens in that game in a tough matchup. Certainly, you can't sit Derrick Henry. We'll see what happens there. And then also in the 1 o'clock window, we have New England at Houston. And let me just say this. As far as New England goes, this is I'm up in Buffalo here, so full transparency. I usually say my Buffalo Bills, but we are Bills Mafia up here. So obviously New England is that team that's been kind of just crushing us for years. Now that I'm doing this show, looking at these injury reports for the New England Patriots is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, they practically list everybody on their roster as questionable. And then game time comes and you see what we've got here, which is Sony Michel was activated off of IR this week, leading you to believe that he's going to play and potentially take work away from Damian Harris. And now, lo and behold, out of all the people that are listed on their injury report as questionable, Sony Michel's the one that's out. So, well, again, thank you, New England, for I know that you're not there for us fantasy football players, so do what you got to do. But, I mean, it's just ridiculous when you go through that rundown and try to look for, important names to kind of put up here on this screen. At any rate, Sony Michel is out for the New England Patriots. Fire up Damian Harris against Houston's poor run defense. Kenny Stills active for the Texans. I think, to me, this is an extremely interesting game to see if Bill Belichick can stop the passing game of Deshaun Watson and Will Fuller, among others. I believe Stephon Gilmore is expected to play. He is not on the list as being out for this game. So we will see if they try to have him lock down Fuller, and perhaps that opens up some production for a guy like Brandon Cooks. We'll see what happens there. New England has not been great against the run. So, again, Duke Johnson. I should have put that on the screen. Obviously, for those of you that don't know, David Johnson is on IR. He will not be playing for Houston. It is Duke Johnson and pretty much him alone in the backfield there up against New England. A good chance for some fantasy production in that game. All right, and let's take a look over in the chat here, and I'm going to put up a next chat I see here from Mary Dadon. Thanks for being back with us again, another return viewer. We appreciate you being on the live stream, and your question is, Tyler Boyd or A.J. Brown? This is a tough decision. I have Tyler Boyd as my top sit this week. I did not include A.J. Brown on the sit list simply because I feel he was too big of a name to potentially be among those that you could possibly be sitting. But in order to work our way through this question, let's get up. Again, we'll go back to this graphic. Fantasy points to wide receivers there on the left side of your screen, and we will kind of analyze this a little bit. Tyler Boyd playing in the 1 o'clock window at Washington. Washington currently allowing the second fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. A.J. Brown also in the 1 o'clock window against Baltimore, and you'll see there Baltimore allowing the fourth fewest fantasy points. I'm sorry, I think I said running back spot. I meant wide receiver. Whatever I said, you know what I mean. This is kind of how it goes here. Anyways, Baltimore, the fourth fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. This is a tough one. Boy, this is an ugly decision either way. I think probably a lot of times when I talk about these decisions on who to play, I look at four things. I look at ability, I look at volume, I look at matchup, I look at game script. Game script to me is a wash in these games. I think these are equal teams in both of those matchups. The matchups are bad on both sides. Boyd and Brown are, to me, both the top guys on their teams. So the volume is a wash on both sides. So it comes down to which guy do you feel is the better player? A.J. Brown, I will say this. If I can call it up really quick, let me see here. A.J. Brown against Chicago put up a nice game in a tough matchup. That tells me if you're going to trust either one of these two guys in another tough matchup, I would probably lean towards A.J. Brown. I'm going to try to call up real quick if I can find that information to see what he was able to do in that game. Here is Tennessee on my other screen. And let's see, wide receivers. A.J. Brown against Chicago. Ooh, Chicago, as you see, the third fewest fantasy points. A.J. Brown, 9 targets, 4 catches, 101 yards, and a touchdown. This is a half-point PPR league. Shows him as 18.10 fantasy points. If it was full PPR, it would be 20.10. Yeah, to me, I would lean towards A.J. Brown if I had to make this choice, but it is a tough choice, and you could certainly make an argument either way. But I think either one is potentially could be a bad week. I would probably lean towards Brown in this one of the two. Again, I have Tannehill as a sit this week. I have Joe Burrow as a sit this week in terms of quarterbacks. So, yeah, this is a tough one. Mary, let me know how it works out. Hopefully whichever guy you pick crushes it, as I usually say, or in this situation, hopefully either one of these guys at least reaches their floor to give you a decent game and allow some of your other players to kind of pick it up and get you that W this week. All right. Again, thank you for being with us on the stream. We appreciate all of you that are return viewers. I will put up our notification. Our live chat remains open, and it will be open for the remainder of the show. We are here to answer your fantasy football questions all show. If you're returning, thank you for being back. If you're a new viewer, welcome. Feel free to jump in the chat. By all means, most importantly, if you're a new viewer, make sure and hit that subscribe button. Get those notifications when we have new content. We are a brand new channel, so we don't necessarily come up quite as high on those searches. So we want to make sure that you guys are all aware when we have new content, as we did last night when we did a special Saturday Stars show at nighttime. We had a lot of nice questions, actually, talking about lineup questions in last night's show. So always fun to do that, and we will keep that chat open for the remainder of this show. We went through all the 1 o'clock games. What I did not go through was the remainder of the games. I do have them in the notes here. I do not have the questionables up graphic-wise, but we'll just take a look, and I'll try to recall who might have been of issue there. 4:05 window on the East Coast. Miami at Denver. I believe Philip Lindsay was questionable in that game. Not sure that there was anyone else to speak of. If I'm missing anybody, feel free, jump in the chat. Let me know if I missed anybody. Also a 4:05 game is the New York Jets at the LA Chargers. Again, you are looking at Kalen Ballage in the backfield there. No Justin Jackson. Austin Eckler still out. The New York Jets, they're the Jets. Nothing to see here. 4:25, Green Bay at Indianapolis. A very interesting game to me. Probably the game that I will be trying to watch the most during that window. I'm waiting to see who wins out between that Indy D and that Green Bay offense. I think either one of them, it's going to be nice to see what they can do against a tough test. One of those two teams, you're going to come away from this game saying, well, Indy's D wasn't what we thought it was, or perhaps Green Bay's offense isn't what we thought it was, and it'll be interesting to see which one of those it is. The other 4:25 game is Dallas at Minnesota. Potentially a higher scoring game. Both teams allowing a lot of points to wide receivers. A lot of interesting decisions here. We talked about some of them last night pertaining to Amari Cooper. Who knows what happens there, other than we expect Dalvin Cook to probably have another big day there, as he's been doing lately. The Sunday night game at 8:20 is Kansas City at Las Vegas. The Raiders obviously beat Kansas City last time. I will say again that I very unwisely sat Josh Jacobs in that last matchup, thinking that Kansas City might have the lead and Jacobs might be seeing less work, perhaps playing from behind. That was not wise. He had a huge game. He's in my lineup this week for sure. And then the Monday night game is the LA Rams at Tampa Bay. This game, oh my goodness. Talk about, this is headaches all over the place. I don't know what to make of the Rams anymore. last week against Seattle was baffling to me, how every team can crush Seattle through the air, and your two best players, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, are not, neither one of them are your leading guy. Josh Reynolds, I just don't get it. I don't understand their backfield there. How do you pick out players there? Tampa Bay, we got two tough defenses. This is a mess of a Monday night game. I predict a 6-2 final score in that game. Actually, I didn't really predict that, but you never know. It's possible. But yeah, this is a mess. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But at any rate, that's the rundown of games. Coming up, a lot of good watches. And again, I'm very happy that it's a Buffalo Bills bye week, so I can strictly pay attention to fantasy football. I know that I've been keeping an eye on this weather because I was planning on playing Jalen Reagor in that Philadelphia-Cleveland game, and I have removed him from the lineup. Unfortunately, I don't have a good option to replace him. My best two choices as a flex, Leonard Fournette and Hayden Hurst. We're going with the dreaded 2 tight end day in fantasy. I don't really want to do that, so I moved Fournette in there. Not a great look. I don't often go looking at my teams during this show, but I had no choice because of the weather there. So, yeah, that one's a little bit rough. At any rate, let's do this. Let's get up a promo for you guys. And here it is. We are the Fantasy Follow. We are a brand new YouTube channel. We appreciate you being with us. If you're with us on the live stream, if you're with us on replay, we're glad you're watching. Please feel free to leave your comments. Let us know your thoughts. And again, our live chat is open for the rest of this show. We got about 20 minutes until game time. We are also on Twitter at the Fantasy Follow, and that's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can leave your fantasy football questions on our Twitter account during the week using the hashtag AskTFFLive, and we will answer those questions live right here on this very show. Facebook / The Fantasy Follow, and our website, thefantasyfollow.com. All right, let's get you starts and sits for week 11. We're going to start out as usual at the quarterback spot. And the top start this week, I've got Ben Roethlisberger from the Pittsburgh Steelers playing at the Jacksonville Jaguars. Jacksonville allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the quarterback position. They have allowed 24-plus fantasy points 6 times this year and have given up 300 or more passing yards to 5 quarterbacks. They are allowing the 3rd most passing yards in the league. Roethlisberger, 25-plus fantasy points in each of the last 2 games and has had 2 or more touchdowns in all but 1 game this year. I like Big Ben as the top start this week. All right, and here's a look at the rest of the top 5 starts at the quarterback spot. And I've got Justin Herbert as number 2 playing against the Jets. The Flying Adam Gases allowing the 4th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have allowed 24 or more fantasy points to 4 opposing quarterbacks this year and are giving up the 4th most passing yards in the league. Herbert, 21-plus fantasy points now in 6 straight games and 2 or more touchdowns in all of those. I like Justin Herbert this week. Teddy Bridgewater, I liked him, but he's out. So forget about Teddy. He was on the list, but he is not playing today, so he will not be a top start. Do not play him. You will not get very many points. Number 4, I've got Matt Ryan for the Atlanta Falcons playing against the Saints. This one goes against the matchup numbers a little bit as New Orleans, only the 19th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. But coming off the bye week and with Julio and Calvin Ridley both back healthy, I like this spot a lot for Matt Ryan. And New Orleans is extremely tough against the run game. So therefore, Atlanta, they like to throw the ball anyway. I think that's the direction that they definitely go in this game. In terms of New Orleans, they allowed 20 or more fantasy points each of the first 5 games to the quarterback position, but none since. They're actually allowing the 15th fewest passing yards in the league. However, Ryan has averaged 22.89 fantasy points over his last 4 games. And last year, in 2 games against the Saints, he averaged 17.08 fantasy points, so a little bit lower. He did have 3 interceptions in those games, but also had 5 touchdowns. So I've got Matt Ryan a little bit on the edge, but I got Matt Ryan as a start this week. I like that spot for the passing game for Atlanta. We'll see what happens in that game. And then Kirk Cousins, a nice matchup. Cousins clearly has been up and down this year, but playing against Dallas, Cowboys giving up the 12th most fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have allowed 25 or more fantasy points 4 times this year, and they've given up 20 passing touchdowns, including 4 or more in the same game twice, allowing the 6th most passing yards in the league. Cousins has averaged 19.69 fantasy points over his last 2 games and 5 touchdowns in those 2 games. So a little bit better out of that spot there in Minnesota. We will see what happens today, but I've got Kirk Cousins as a start. The top sit is Ryan Tannehill from the Tennessee Titans, playing at the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens allowing the 10th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have only allowed 19 or more fantasy points to 2 opposing quarterbacks this year and are giving up the 7th fewest passing yards in the league. Tannehill, last 4 games, all of them under 19 fantasy points, a little bit of a tough stretch, and this is certainly a tough matchup, so I've got Ryan Tannehill as the top sit for Week 11. All right, before we go through the rest of the sits here, I got another chat to go to, so let me get this graphic off of the screen, and let's go back over to our chat, and it is from Mary Dedon, and the question you have is Mike Davis or Giovanni Bernard. I love Mike Davis this week. In terms of the matchups, let's get that up on the screen. Fantasy points to the running back spot. Davis for Carolina. Let me just double check you know what I need to do is I need my other screen to tell me what the games are, so I don't have to go flipping through my notes vigorously to find that information out easily. Carolina playing against, I should know this, Detroit Lions. Detroit Lions allowing the most fantasy points to the running back spot. Giovanni Bernard for Cincinnati playing at Washington. Washington allows, 20th. They are on the list there. You see on the left side of your screen to the running back spot. I think without Teddy Bridgewater, they have to rely even more on the run game for Carolina today. Cincinnati, I think, will potentially, I don't know what to predict in that game, to be honest. But of those 2, I love Mike Davis this week. I think he is a great start. And probably there are a lot of guys who I would pick Mike Davis over. And I do think in this spot that I think Davis is a fine choice here for you. As I always say, I hope whichever one you choose crushes it. Go with your gut. But I do think Mike Davis is a very fine start playing against the team giving up the most fantasy points to the running back spot. And thank you again, Mary, for the question. And you say facts. Thank you. I like that. No, thank you for being here. Again, this is what we love to do. And, we can give you lots of content, but without you viewers in the chat, we're basically just talking and you're just listening. And I know I personally would rather have conversations with you and love talking fantasy football. And here's another follow-up. And you say Robbie in terms of Robbie Anderson or A.J. Brown. So let's put up the wide receiver numbers here on the left side of your screen. Robbie Anderson for Carolina against Detroit. Detroit allowing, where do we find them? Right in the middle, 18th most fantasy points to wide receivers. A.J. Brown playing for the Tennessee Titans against Baltimore. Baltimore the 4th fewest. I would typically give AJ the edge in terms of, I feel that he is probably the higher prestige player, I guess, of these 2. But here it's a tough matchup. And so I think this changes with the fact that Bridgewater's not playing. I will honestly say maybe someone can jump in the chat and tell me who is starting for Carolina, because I honestly don't even know the answer to that question. Who is playing in place of Teddy Bridgewater? I don't even know who their backup is there. To me, if Teddy was there, I would probably trust that matchup. I think it's iffy in the sense that you don't have your regular quarterback there. So I probably lean towards A.J. Brown in this one. And I see a couple follow-ups there. You say Brown, and you say A.J. Brown has the most upside. Yeah, I have to agree with that Anderson becomes limited because of that quarterback situation. Brown is limited by the matchup, but he did overcome that matchup against Chicago, and perhaps he's able to do the same against Baltimore today. I have to probably still sticking with Brown because of that quarterback spot. And you follow up, you say, I'm starting AJ and Mike. Thanks. I'm going to head out prepare for the game. By all means, this is called the Sunday pregame show, but you got to pregame for these games too. So go out there and do what you got to do. Enjoy the day of football. And thank you again for being with us here on our YouTube channel. All right, awesome. Let's put up the notification, let you know the live chat remains open. We will get this graphic off the screen, and we will go back to where we left off. And I believe we were talking about quarterback sits. I think that's what we were talking about. If it's not, then, hey, I'll talk about them again. We got about 12 minutes till game time. Plenty of time. All right. As we mentioned, Ryan Tannehill is the top sit in this game at number 2. Phillip Rivers playing against the Packers, who are allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They have only allowed one quarterback over 15 fantasy points in the last 6 games, and Rivers has certainly been up and down. He has been under 17 the last 2 games and also 7 out of his 9 games. So I like Phil Rivers as a sit this week. Jared Goff, another player who has definitely been up and down. Not a great matchup here. Tampa Bay, 9th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. They've only allowed 2 opposing quarterbacks to go above 21 fantasy points this year, and none above 25, allowing the 9th fewest passing yards in the league. Goff, under 17 for the last 4 games, and bafflingly, no touchdown passes against the Seattle Seahawks. I believe Seattle was currently allowing 88 passing touchdowns going into that game, and Goff had 0. I'm not sure if those are exact numbers. Don't quote me. But again, I've got Jared Goff as a sit. Tom Brady, I've got as a sit. Perhaps a questionable one there. Always a tough sit for Tom Brady because, sometimes he just overcomes, but this is a horrible matchup. And I believe the Rams are tougher than just Jalen Ramsey. I believe it's across the board in their secondary. Again, they're allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Brady, 31 or more fantasy points 2 of the last 4, but he was under 20 in the other 2. I've got him as a sit this week, and also I have Joe Burrow as a sit, playing against the Washington football team, who are allowing the 11th fewest fantasy points to the quarterback spot. Burrow, although I like him, has been under 19 the last 5 of the last 6 games, so I've got Joe Burrow as a sit this week. The top starts and sits for Week 11 at the wide receiver position. The top start, I've got Adam Thielen from the Minnesota Vikings. Last week I had him as a sit, and he had a nice game against the Bears, so I thought only fair to have him as the top start for this week, playing against the Dallas Cowboys, who are currently allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. They have allowed 16-plus fantasy points to 12 different wide receivers this year, and have given up 100 or more receiving yards to 5 of them. Thielen, last week, 20.3 fantasy points, 2 touchdowns against the Bears. I like this spot for Adam Thielen. I have him as the top start. And we take a look at the rest of the top 5 here at the wide receiver spot in terms of starts. I got Terry McLaurin, number 2, playing against the Bengals. They are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. McLaurin, 7 receptions, 4 straight games now, and he's hit a touchdown in 2 of those 4. I like this is a big game for Terry McLaurin. Number 3, I've got Chase Claypool. Again, I think this is a good spot for all of the receivers in Pittsburgh. I've just simply chosen Claypool as the guy that I have put among the top 5. But I think this is a great spot for Juju and Deontay Johnson as well. Jacksonville allowing the 9th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Number 4, Mike Williams. Again, in this game against the Jets, I don't have Keenan Allen on this list because I feel Keenan Allen at this point is an auto start. I certainly like him. He certainly would be there. But Mike Williams, I think, will have plenty of room for his as well in this game. So I have him at the number 4 spot. And again, Marvin Jones for the Lions in that matchup. Potential big volume bump there with no Danny Amendola, no Kenny Galladay. The Panthers are actually only 21st to the wide receiver spot. But again, the volume reigns there. Jones, 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games, and he has averaged 18.6 fantasy points over those 3. So I do like Marvin Jones as a start this week. Top sit this week for the wide receivers. I've got Tyler Boyd from the Cincinnati Bengals playing at the Washington football team. Washington allowing the 2nd fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver position. They have only allowed 3 players 13 or more fantasy points up until last week when they did allow 2 players over 14. and they're also allowing the fewest passing yards in the league. Boyd last week against Pittsburgh, 10.1 fantasy points. This is a tough spot. I have Tyler Boyd as the top sit. All right, and the rest of the sits this week, I've got Robert Woods from the LA Rams. Again, it's turning into a situation there in LA where it's kind of difficult to pick what you're going to do there, but this is a bad matchup. 8th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Woods only 8.6 fantasy points last week against Seattle. He's been under 9 in 2 of his last 3 games. Corey Davis I've got as a sit. Again, this game against Baltimore, the 4th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. If you look back at that Chicago game that we talked about where A.J. Brown was kind of able to still have a decent game, Corey Davis had 0 fantasy points in that game, so a tough one there. I think, it's kind of difficult to pick anybody that you think is a great potential in this game, but I got Corey Davis as a sit. Travis Fulgham for the Eagles. Actually, it's a good matchup here. The Browns allowing the 6th most fantasy points to wide receivers. However, the difference here is the volume for Fulgham has changed with Jalen Reagor back in the fold, with Alshon Jeffrey back in the fold, and also the weather situation in Cleveland not looking great. So again, only 5 targets, 1 catch last week against the Giants for Fulgham. I've got him as a sit this week. And Jamison Crowder playing against the Chargers, 6th fewest fantasy points to the wide receiver spot. Crowder saw just 2 targets, did have a touchdown last week against New England, but certainly it looks like Joe Flacco has been not necessarily afraid to look elsewhere among that wide receiver core for the Jets. Top 5 starts and sits at the running back position for Week 11. Top start, I've got Mike Davis from the Carolina Panthers. This week playing against the Detroit Lions. The Lions currently allowing the most fantasy points to the running back position. They have given up 17-plus fantasy points to 6 different running backs in the last 4 games. And last week, 3 rushing touchdowns to Washington, the combination of Antonio Gibson and J.D. McKissic. They are allowing the 3rd most rushing yards in the league. Now, Davis has had some nice games to start his run, filling in for Christian McCaffrey, and then had a few down games. But he's actually had the 2nd most receptions among all running backs this year, only behind Alvin Kamara. So it's been a nice year for Mike Davis. I think this is a very nice spot. I've got him as the top start for Week 11. All right, and here's the rest of the top 5 for you as we put a reminder up there for those of you on the live stream. The live chat is open. We are glad to answer your fantasy football questions all show long, even if we're talking about other content. We're here right up until game time, so if you got any last-minute decisions, jump in the chat and let us know. The rest of the top 5, Antonio Gibson, I think a great spot here this week playing against the Bengals. Bengals allowing the 6th most rushing yards in the league. Gibson has had 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games and had 22.5 fantasy points last week against the Lions. Adrian Peterson for Detroit against Carolina. With no DeAndre Swift today, it's just Peterson and Kerryon Johnson. I think he gets the bulk of the work, despite losing work the past few weeks. I like this spot for Peterson and Carolina. They've allowed 24 more fantasy points to 5 running backs this year. So I think Peterson in for a nice day today. Kareem Hunt I like as well. In that weather potentially game there against the Eagles. They're a little bit lower in terms of matchup, but I don't think that Hunt, again, loses work. I don't think you're worried about Nick Chubb there. I like him as a start. And Nyheim Hines for the Colts. I like Nyheim Hines again this week. The Packers allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to the running back spot. And I think of the guys there, I think Hines is most in line for the work. And I have seen some reports actually that he is expected to get a bulk of the work, even including the rushing this week. So I think Nyheim Hines is a fine start at the running back spot this week. Top sit for running backs this week, I've got Todd Gurley from the Atlanta Falcons playing at the New Orleans Saints, currently allowing the fewest fantasy points to the running back position. They have allowed no running backs over 15 fantasy points in the last 5 games, and they are giving up the 2nd fewest rushing yards in the league. Gurley has had a pretty nice season. In fact, 4 touchdowns in the last 3 games. However, this is a very tough matchup, and I think Todd Gurley is the top sit this week. All right, look at the rest of the sits here. I've got Darrell Henderson from the Rams. Tough matchup here. 6th fewest fantasy points allowed by the Bucks. And Henderson less than 10 touches each of the last 2 games. Then I've got Leonard Fournette on the other side of that matchup there. I think that Ronald Jones is the hot hand right now in that backfield, and it's also a tough matchup, the 5th fewest allowed by the Rams. Joshua Kelly for the Chargers. I do not like Kelly in this matchup here. I think it's going to be Kalen Ballage getting the bulk of the work there. And again, similar with Jordan Wilkins, the reason why I have him on the sit list here is because I feel like it's going to be Nyheim Hines that's going to be the guy there in this game. So I've got Jordan Wilkins as a running back sit. Top starts and sits for week 11 at the tight end spot. Top start, I've got Hunter Henry from the LA Chargers playing at home against the New York Jets. The Jets currently allowing the 10th most fantasy points to the tight end position. They have allowed 10 or more fantasy points to 5 different players this year, and they gave up 109 yards to Travis Kelce in week 8. Granted, that is what Travis Kelce does. Henry, last week, 13.0 fantasy points with a touchdown against Miami. I think this is another nice spot for Hunter Henry with Justin Herbert throwing the ball. I think this is another nice game for the tight end from LA. Rest of the top 5 here at the tight end spot. Hayden Hurst in the number 2 spot there this week. Again, I like this matchup in Atlanta in terms of the pass game, and I like Hurst in terms of overall for this season. He's had 10 or more fantasy points now in 4 straight games. New Orleans allowing the 7th most fantasy points to the tight end position. Eric Ebron has had a great run of matchups here. This week is no different against Jacksonville, allowing the 5th most fantasy points to tight ends. Logan Thomas has been teetering on that is he going to break through deal the entire year. A nice spot here. Cincinnati allowing the 2nd most fantasy points to the tight end spot. And then at number 5 is the ever tough to stop TJ Hawkinson for Detroit, who hard to not like him in any week. Although last week he had a little bit of a down game. But again, I've got TJ Hawkinson as a start this week. The top tight end sit this week, I've got Robert Tonyan from the Green Bay Packers playing at the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts currently allowing the fewest fantasy points to the tight end spot. They have only allowed 2 tight ends 10 or more fantasy points this year and have not allowed any touchdowns to a tight end all season. Tonyan has had a couple big games this year, but in the last 2 weeks, averaging just 3.9 fantasy points. I think this is a tough matchup for Robert Tonyan, and I've got him as the top sit this week. All right, and the rest of the tight end sits as we're about at game time here, so we'll go through the rest of these. I've got Mike Gesicki from the Dolphins, playing against the Broncos, allowing the 11th fewest fantasy points to the tight end spot. Darren Fell is splitting time there in Houston, playing against New England. New England allowing the 4th fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. Number 4 is Dallas Goedert. I'm going to lump him in the Zach Ertz field here. I just don't understand in Philadelphia why these tight ends are not playing better when they've had opportunities. So he is going to be a sit for me as long as I can sit him and find somebody else as a decent replacement. And then Irv Smith has been a little banged up. I had him as a sit this week. Not even sure what his status will be for their game. It's obviously a later game, so he potentially, I don't know if he was still questionable this week or not. But nonetheless, I have Irv Smith as a sit. All right, that's the run through of all of our starts and sits, and we are at game time, so we can't wait for another day of great football. Just looking for some, hopefully a nice day of getting you towards those fantasy football playoffs. Take a look at how many games we have here. We got 7 games at the 1 o'clock window. We've got another 4 games at the 4 p.m. window as I have something flying around here in my face. Try to get rid of that. And then, of course, the night games between Sunday night and Monday night. So, this is shaping up to be a nice day to start making your run towards those playoffs not that far away. Again, we appreciate everybody for being here on the stream. For all of you returning viewers that have been with us, for those of you that are new, And of course, if you're watching on replay as well, we thank you for finding us. We'll get you a little bit of our information before we go. Let's put up the information for this show. This is the TFF Live Sunday pregame show. We're here every Sunday, streaming live on our YouTube channel at 12 noon Eastern time, taking you right up until game time and answering all your fantasy football questions and getting you ready for your matchups each week. We thank you for being with us on this show, and we also want to give you just our general information. We are the Fantasy Follow. We are a brand new YouTube channel this year, so if you found us, we know it takes a little bit of work because we don't come up quite as high in the searches, but as we continue to grow, we certainly want you guys to get those notifications when we have new content, so make sure when you're with us either live or on those replays, click that subscribe button so you can get those notifications, find out when we have new content, new shows. We are also on Twitter at the Fantasy Follow. That's fantasy spelled FNTSY. And you can send us your fantasy football questions on Twitter during the week using the hashtag AskTFFLive. And we will answer those questions live on this very Sunday pregame show. Facebook / The Fantasy Follow and our website, thefantasyfollow.com. So we'll wrap it up here for today. I can tell you this, that in terms of just to share my personal insight on the matchups that are going on today, I will say I have this one matchup going in one of my leagues where I plan to play Jalen Reagor as my flex this week. I like his matchups, and then this weather thing happened in Cleveland. That has left me in a spot where I'm literally deciding between – I right now have plugged in Leonard Fournette in the Monday night game. Well, I don't like the matchup, but at least I have time to figure out if I can find somebody better. At the 4 o'clock window, I also have Allen Lazard on this list, who is just coming off of IR. I don't think that's a great spot. Hayden Hurst, that game has already started. This is just an ugly spot for me. I was not really prepared for this potential to happen. I will say that. Normally, I don't even actually get a chance to really look at these lineups. I try to set them before the show so I can just focus on the show. But in this particular situation, I went ahead and started looking at things when I could to see what was going to happen there. And, yeah, it doesn't look like I have not turned on that game yet to see what the weather situation is like. Again, we're live right now, and the games are just around starting here. So no idea what's going to happen there, but I do expect that if the weather's bad, that is going to be another nice run game. Miles Sanders on one side, and I hope for me, Nick Chubb, because I have him in a couple of spots. I don't have Kareem on anywhere, but I certainly think it's going to be good for both. I don't know what Carson Wentz does with this, and it's just oof. It could be, if it's another game like Houston was there, it could be rough for everybody. So we will see what happens. But obviously, Philadelphia's starting to get a little more healthy. Again, you got to remember, there's been a lot of talk this year about that Philadelphia team, the struggles and Wentz and everything. But there was no preseason this year. And as many injuries as they've had, like you look at a game like last week and you got to figure like some of these games just end up being throwaways. Like these guys have got to get into the swing of things. So what does Reagor come back with? What does Alshon Jeffrey have coming back? Dallas Goedert, Richard Rodgers, does Ertz play again? On the other side of things, certainly Jarvis Landry, we'll see what he does. Austin Hooper did very little last week. Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb. A lot of interesting matchups, but not the very least is Atlanta and New Orleans, and that game is in the 1 o'clock window, and I believe that's one I'm going to be paying close attention to. I want to see what happens with that quarterback situation, and also I hope Michael Thomas has a decent game. So, and I'm sure a lot of you do as well. So, again, another great day of fantasy football coming up. We appreciate you being with us. We are TFF Live. This is the Sunday pregame show. We will say, as we always do, good luck in fantasy. We'll see you next week.